we think of agents as advanced AI systems that leverage large language models to navigate and complete complex workflows. And the reason we define it like that is really around how our businesses operate and actually how our customers leverage our data and insights. And so if you think about whether you're an analyst or a consultant or somebody that's part of an organization that's looking at thousands and thousands of different points of data, documents, and so on, you're all about like understanding, how do I find the insights to make those decisions that I need to accelerate how I provide value, both as an individual and as a business.
Welcome to Pioneers, the show where we explore the intersection between humanity and AI. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. Over the last 10 years, I've built 3 AI startups, written 2 books about the subject, and I run a weekly AI newsletter. I also regularly teach and speak about the topic at conferences. This technology has grown faster than I think any of us could have imagined, and it's making us ask really important questions, such as how ethical is AI? What will this technology look like in a few years, let alone a few months? And most importantly, does it have the power to truly change the world? And what does it mean for you? On this show, I'll be interviewing the founders, operators, and pioneers that are introducing AI into their companies and industries. We'll be asking them the really heavy-hitting questions that make them dig deep into the core of what we do. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel, and today I have a very special guest with me today, Bhavesh Dayalji, who is the Chief AI Officer at S&P Global. Bhavesh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ankur. I would also add that I'm Kensho CEO as well. So I'm one of the fortunate few that gets to have 2 roles. And so I'd love to kind of talk to you about the intersection of both of those roles and how that came to be.
Yeah, incredible. It's a multi-hyphenate role, and that must be quite the challenge, but also the opportunity. And I think for the benefit of our audience, we would love to hear a little bit about your story, both being involved with Kensho and growing that up, scaling that up, and then obviously the S&P Global's acquisition of Kensho years ago to your current role now as the Chief AI Officer as well. Can you just maybe share about what that journey looked like and then what it means for you today?
Yeah, absolutely. And just like most people's career journeys, and I'm sure yours as well, I never expected to be doing this when I graduated from software engineering in the UK and then started my career at CERN, the European Organization for Particle Physics, looking for the Higgs boson particle. And so I meandered into kind of management consulting for a good part of my life. And then I kind of get bored. And so I started to think about like, what else could I be doing? And found Kensho when it was in its infancy and joined Kensho as this kind of fast fledgling AI startup and just went and built it. And so anybody that's created or is part of startups know that like whatever you get told your role isn't actually your role. And so I got to do amazing things like interact with customers, product development, thinking about engineering principles. And finally, we sold our company to S&P Global in 2018. And then, I think that's when, S&P Global really, prioritized AI. And so think about that. In 2018, they prioritized it way before large language models and ChatGPT hit the stage. And so it was really exciting to realize the importance that data has to play in AI. And increasingly, the importance AI had to play in S&P Global's future. And then it's from that the leadership of S&P Global decided that, we need a chief AI officer as well. And so the reason that that's important, I think, is it really elevates the importance of AI and it makes it such that, we've got to be thinking about, and I with my team have got to be thinking about a meaningful strategic vision for AI, for our customers, for our people, and frankly, the future of S&P Global's businesses.
Yeah, I think it was very visionary of S&P Global to realize the bigger opportunity that AI could play, and then Kensho being kind of a bigger catalyst. It was definitely a very high-profile event. I remember in 2018 when that acquisition happened. And sometimes big corporations buy really hot startups and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to integrate it properly. But it feels like the story here has been very, very different. And I'm very interested in hearing the story of how Kensho and S&P Global, the rest of the organization, how they work in tandem. But before we do, let's maybe talk a little bit about some of these AI topics. So last 2 years, especially with the ChatGPT moment in November of 2022, it was all about chatbots, co-pilots, more of these assistive experiences. I think the talk track as well as development track for many organizations has moved now to AI agents and agentic AI. Could you maybe help us understand why is there so much excitement around AI agents? What are AI agents? Why has the narrative shifted all of a sudden?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? And I think it really first comes down to right now, a lot of the AI systems in which we interact with, the user is prompting the large language model to do something, and that's helping to accelerate workflows. Increasingly, what we're finding is that with these powerful agents and agentic type of architecture, it's allowing AI to take actions. Now, that's both amazing and also scary in some parts, right? Because people are worried about the unintended consequences. And then frankly, there's also a million definitions of what agents are. And so I'm sure I could say something here and there'll be the thousands of people that will disagree with me. But for me and for us, we think of agents as advanced AI systems that leverage large language models to navigate and complete complex workflows. And the reason we define it like that is really around how our businesses operate and actually how our customers leverage our data and insights. And so if you think about whether you're an analyst or a consultant or somebody that's part of an organization that's looking at thousands and thousands of different points of data, documents, and so on, you're all about understanding how do I find the insights to make those decisions that I need to accelerate how I provide value, both as an individual and as a business.
Can you talk a little bit more about what type of data or data readiness you need to have, how you've thought about this at S&P Global? Because the challenge that everyone kind of points to is it's hard to trust AI. There's a high degree of hallucination, particularly in a regulated space like this. You do not want to run with bad responses from AI, but when you think about agentic AI, it's taking actions. You don't want the AI to take improper actions, and then that impacts downstream work that people do, or affects financial outcomes. So how do you think about the data readiness as well as the hallucination problem that people often point to?
I mean, it's exactly the right area to focus on in order to get the value from AI, I believe. And so when you think about our business as S&P Global, a lot of what we do is provide data and insights to our customers. And then when I think about how do we do that with this paradigm shift and this kind of platform shift that's occurring more towards AI kind of driven products, our AI systems need to interact with data, whether that's structured or unstructured. And, it seems like we've kind of figured out the unstructured part through jamming a bunch of text into these large language models and then determining the efficacy of the result of that text. But I think increasingly what we've struggled with is understanding how do we get access to that data that sits within our enterprises or our customers are selling that. And so we call that AI ready data. And so making sure that our data is AI ready, specifically that structured tabular data that sits in our databases. So that's why we created the offering like our kind of Kensho LLM ready API, which really focuses on creating API calls to our structured databases that augment these large language model solutions so that you can trust the data that you're getting. And the way we develop it is such that it's kind of auditable. It's traceability. It provides the kind of citations. And so increasingly what we've realized is there are going to be different form factors that you want to access that data. So there are going to be things like text to SQL agents where you can generate SQL and structured query language where you can get access to the database insights and data, and that produces part of the result that you see. And again, the way we've tackled it is we've made sure that you can see exactly what data is being retrieved. So as an individual, you can make sure that I understand where that data is coming from. It's not a hallucination. It's not something that's made up, which continues to be a problem for kind of large language models. And if I could, we've kind of extended that into the kind of agent world. And the way we're thinking about that is, as we create this kind of complex agent framework that we're creating for our enterprise, the cornerstone of that framework is our Kensho grounding agent, which enables kind of trusted data retrieval across any AI-ready S&P Global data set. And the reason that's really important is the hallucination point that I made. And I think for me, that's going to be extremely important as our customers build these agentic systems that require trusted, valuable data so that they can take actions. And that action point is the thing that I'm most excited about with these AI systems.
Yeah, let's dig into actions in just a second, but I think it's really incredible what you've highlighted, which is first, the data needs to be in a format that is going to be leverageable by a large language model. So if the data is not in good shape, good order, the context that's passed in an LLM is going to be poor. And then the other big thing is trust. How do you show trust? Some of that is like around traceability, being able to cite where that information came from. So as a business operator or as a human, essentially, you can go and double check the response. And I think it's going to take some time before like people really feel comfortable running with like basically outputs that AI generates for really critical, complex workflows. But this is a means to go and handle the change management aspect that I think a lot of people maybe don't think about when they think about agentic AI, that the technology itself is very capable, but in a regulated space like this, it's not enough to just like have AI do certain things. You need to be able to build trust with the end user. And if the trust isn't there, they're not really going to go and run with the outputs, right? Because it could, it could put their job at risk. It could put their company at risk when it comes to regulation. So could we talk a little bit about these actions that you've referred to? And I think what would be really great is to hear, and how would work like this get done historically, like maybe today or a year ago? And what does that same workflow look like when you have actions performed by agentic AI as part of that workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, when you think about, what we're doing a lot of times, and this isn't specific to just S&P Global, you have all of these different sources of data. You have all of these different formats of the data. You're then, integrating all of that together into whether it's a document or whether it's a type of financial model to take an action, right? Like, and I can say that there are use cases for that as a professional analyst in a consulting company, or a financial professional who has to think about financial modeling and discounted cash flows and so on. And in order to do that, they've got to go find the data. And it's where you've got to go find the data that, companies like S&P Global are really important. And so if you're a big bank or a hedge fund or a corporate, like, you're looking at our data as the source of truth and the accurate source of truth to do that. And so when I think about these actions, when I think about the workflows of those folks, now that they can trust the agents to go retrieve that data, present it to them to create the first draft of, say, a company profile or an equity analyst report, or, think about a junior banker workflow where you're, finding all this information and you're synthesizing it. And I had this wonderful conversation with somebody we just hired recently at Kensho, where we talked about the fact that, like, wow, his background was in private equity. And one of the things that he was telling me about was just like, it was crazy to me still how much people spend collecting information, putting it together in documents, and then, reviewing it and then understanding, like, where it goes up the kind of chain at the next point. And the thing that I was most fascinated with is, like, that's the reason that we work long hours. It isn't because it's the kind of complex work and the thinking that we're doing. And the way I think about this is, I don't imagine agents or AI to just take over, all of the humans' work. I actually think of it as, like, how do you create higher up the value chain work for these individuals? And that's the differentiation that we're doing here at S&P Global and that we want to happen for our customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. When people think about what role do humans play in a world where really well-trained AI agents are doing some of the work that people do, is there room for humans to be involved? And I think for the spaces that we're speaking about, there absolutely is. In fact, the work that the AI agents are taking away is structuring that data, retrieving that data, maybe contextualizing that data, like getting models built out, like discounted cash flow models and such on the relevant data, and then arming the person, the human that wants to go and do more critical thinking and reasoning and
synthesizing a lot of information, both the ones that the AI agents have surfaced, but then additional information that the human has access to from conversations and from market analysis. More broadly speaking, there's going to be plenty of work for the person, the human, to do. But I think AI agents become this massively assistive function, right? It's almost like every single human today, whether they're an individual contributor or not, will have a small army of specialized AI agents that are doing work on their behalf, making their role easier, but allowing them to actually do deeper, more valuable work for their organization.
I think that's exactly right, Ankur. And the other thing that people, I don't think, have really realized yet is just the fact that, AI doesn't need to sleep. So if you think about like just how much information is digital and how much information is going to kind of continue to be digital. And if you think about like just, it seems to me like we've forgotten about cloud migration and, digitization, and we kind of moved on to AI. But my guess is, and anecdotally, I've heard this a lot, is like, that's still relevant right now. Like, we're still figuring out how to put online more interesting data, how to make sure it's available for these AI systems to go analyze. And I think it's the connections between data that even humans miss, right? So if you think about, take an example like supply chain and the complicated nature of supply chains and what happened during COVID. Like, would it have been easier if we had AI systems that understood the complex supply chains that exist within a specific company? So you understood the choke points, the areas that were going to be difficult to kind of fix if there were going to be issues in specific countries and regions. And these are things that humans and people that have decades of experience as geopolitical specialists or, people in governments made sense. Like they understood that. But you and I don't understand that. But I know that with AI, we can now start to have an understanding of what that would mean for our business. And then I think the other part of agents that really excites me around this concept is also about hyper-personalization. Like what you're interested in, Ankur, I'm not interested in. And so like, maybe some things would be interesting together, but there are going to be things that, I can now have AI do. Like as an example, today I used one of our deep research tools as part of Spark Assist, which I hope we'll be talking about in a moment, to actually go analyze types of companies, specific types of companies that have IP, an IP that's hard to kind of replicate to make the company valuable. And, honestly, the reason I was looking at that is because I was thinking about like, I'd like to invest in more IP driven businesses.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense, Bhavesh. And I think that's right. The hyper personalization really matters. And, I think one of the things that's important to do is every single organization has a particular way of getting work done, right? So, and that institutional knowledge may be documented, may sit in people's heads. When you think about the development of AI agents and more complex agentic workflows, how are you thinking about the organizational ways of doing work that somehow the agentic AI needs to be exposed to in order to do that work in the way that that particular team or individual organization operates?
This is my favorite topic to talk about. Like, how can AI help people? How can AI help workflows of organizations? And at S&P Global, our focus on, adopting innovative technologies is real. Like, and I think it's real because, the investment that we place in that. So at S&P Global, we created Kensho Spark Assist, and that's a generative AI tool in which our people have access to the latest model developments to actually accelerate their workflows. And the reason that that's important is that, where we are in this journey on AI adoption, it's still really, really early days. And so you need teams working on this every single day and experimenting and understanding how their workflows are going to change. Like we are a huge company. We're 40,000 people.
Yeah.
And so, we could create lots of learning programs and lots of ways in which they should think about generative AI and AI. But if they can't touch it, if they can't use it, if they can't think about how their workflows are going to change, what use is it? And so when I think about, our Kensho Spark Assist tool being used by, 40,000 people, it's amazing to see the things that they come up with, right? Like this is about them having this tool to change the way that they operate on behalf of, the teams that they work on and also our customers. And so, we have amazing things like people creating report generation tools with the deep research capabilities. And now that's just changing the workflows of how we're putting economic reports out there in the market, or ways in which we're analyzing specific data, or even things like understanding consumer and our own employees' sentiments around specific surveys that are, we kind of put out. And that's just enriching the whole experience of our people. And my hope is changing the culture, making it kind of more focused on innovation and change.
So I really want to dig into Spark Assist because it's obviously it's enabling the entire internal team. And I'm curious sort of how that gets used, if at all, for customers that you have. But before we do, maybe let's take a step back. I think generative AI and now agentic AI, there's a challenge in getting up to speed on it as an organization, figuring out how to go and develop it and introduce it to the various teams. And obviously at your scale, you have many internal employees, 40,000, as you mentioned. I think there's something very unique and special around the way that Kensho operates and how you're introducing it, especially in your hybrid role or like dual role here with S&P Global as well. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe the innovation R&D starts, and then how basically broad-based adoption happens within the organization at S&P Global?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, all credit really has to go to the leadership of S&P Global here, because, many acquisition stories end in the company, disappearing, either being integrated into, the parent company and the talent disappearing, right? Like onto their next kind of adventure. And I think S&P Global understood that this is a unique team that needs to be kind of, left alone from the perspective of cultivating and innovating and experimenting on technology. And that's what we do. We've created a suite of product offerings around data extraction, business audio transcription, entity linking, so the linking of data. And all of that's available on products like the S&P Global Marketplace that customers can benefit from externally. And the best analogy I could come up with on this is like what happened with AWS and Amazon, right? The fact that AWS was really created for Amazon, but then they realized the benefit that has to, customers externally. And that's the way we've kind of approached it. A lot of what we did was all around, innovating for S&P Global so that they could get their products out to market faster. And so when we realized that there are ways in which they could help our customers, S&P Global's customers, we started to commercialize those products. And now with generative AI and the fact that we can create, tools like Spark Assist, it's really important that you kind of have this incubation experimental team, I think, where not everything goes right, and frankly, not everybody thinks that, we should be spending the money on innovation like this. And R&D is like that. R&D is very much a case in which you sometimes don't know what you get from it, but we know that every company wants to invest in innovation and R&D. And so I'm quite thankful for the leadership of S&P Global that they understand the importance of this. And I'd like to think that we continue to repay that faith to have this amazing suite of offerings and really help scale it across our enterprise. This isn't just about the Kensho team or frankly any team across S&P Global. It's more about how do you democratize this technology so that it can really impact all of our people and our customers.
So when you think about some of the offerings you have, it seems like the Kensho LLM Ready API, that's available for end users, perhaps through the marketplace. What about Spark Assist? Are there plans to make that available, or parts of it available, or similar experiences available to your broader customer base? And would it be kind of an approach where you test it internally, make sure it's working well, make sure that you've tested and developed that to a fully mature product before making it more external facing? I'm just curious how that cycle operates.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Ankur. For us, I look at, Kensho Spark Assist as our internal productivity tool where we can innovate, where we can accelerate the workflows of our people and really help educate our people on generative AI and how that can help. But it's so funny because, I'm pretty sure that I'd be killed by my team if I just announced that we're going to release this thing externally, very, very soon. But it's something we're exploring, right? One of the things that's been fascinating to me, and, I had the few interesting meetings in Davos earlier this year and a few other places where customers have been blown away by the sophistication of our tool and how it helps accelerate the workflows of our people. So, we're kind of veering to this place of saying wow, pretty similar to like how it happened with our other suite of products, where our customers are telling us that like this is kind of impressive, and so how can we make that available to them? But then you've got to think about things like, security, scalability, making sure like, you're reacting to the product's feedback, the clients and customers' feedback. And so I think that part is something that we take really seriously. So it's an ongoing debate, I would say, Ankur, but I wouldn't be surprised if you end up seeing a version of Kensho Spark Assist out there in the wild externally.
I think that's incredible. I think it seems like Kensho has been so unique for S&P Global, and the fact that they kept it basically like as this like a segmented space for really great R&D and innovation to happen, but then it was adopted in stages by the larger organization at large. And then given your customer base, it's like what comes internally that you think would make sense for your customer base, you're able to introduce that as external facing product once it's been tested and you've gotten the security and scalability issues resolved. And that creates an incredible flywheel loop, because then as more customers and users start using it, then it's feedback for the team, maybe at Kensho, maybe a little bit more broader than that, to go and innovate more, do additional R&D. Just as basically like a startup would think about its feedback loop in terms of getting users, getting information, and then leveraging that through the product function and engineering function to improve the product offering thereafter.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Ankur. And I think that the thing that I would just stress is you're hearing all the successes. If anybody believes that like everything that we do ends up in success, I'd be lying. And I think the key thing to remember is that there are things that take longer than I'd like, or there are things that just don't work out the way I wanted them to work out. But that way I know I'm trying hard and my team is trying hard, because not every piece of innovation or experimentation is going to result in value. There are going to be some things in which we learn from those things, and then we're able to bring that to the next kind of opportunity that we kind of kick off for the enterprise.
Yeah, with that in mind, Bhavesh, what are some of those challenges that you're facing right now when you're developing and then also trying to get enterprise adoption of agentic AI?
Yeah, so, to be honest, at first, you've got to realize that like all of this technology that we're creating, all of this technology that you hear about from startups, hyperscalers, or anybody, it's still being worked out, right? Like, so, whatever anybody's kind of talking about or selling, like what you find out when you start using it is like, oh, well, it doesn't really do the thing that folks thought it would do. And so the education part continues to be, I think, a challenge about like where we are in this journey. And so, and frankly, those are the conversations that happen at the highest level of any company, which is like, when are we going to see the value of AI? When are we going to see the value of AI? And I think like, the education part continues to be a challenge and something that needs to be worked on again and again, both for, leaders in an organization and frankly for engineering teams, right? Like adoption of, say, things like code generation tools continue to be slow. And I was having this conversation with a hyperscaler, which I won't name, but, one of his observations was it's still amazing to them how slow the adoption of code generation tools are, given that they produce them and sell them, so so like that part is, I think we're going to continue to be a challenge, but we're on the journey. And remember, as I said, early days. I think the other part is just like where you place bets, like I think like a lot of companies, large and small, rightly so, kind of, went in and, had all of these kind of initiatives, proof of concepts, demos. And before you know it, it becomes unruly, right? Like there's 500 or 1,000 of them, depending on your organization size. And then I think you've got to realize is like, what's the differentiation of your company or your team? And why do you believe AI is going to impact that? And really place a few meaningful bets where you understand it really well and you can be kind of differentiator in what you're building. And then buy the rest of it. Like the build versus buy thing continues to be like a conversation that I have with all of my leaders and teams, because everybody wants to build their own version of something. And I think in an enterprise like ours, like we're trying to make sure we're creating standards and ways in which we can share capabilities. But, the funny thing with AI is right now humans are developing a lot of it in terms of roadmaps and applications. And the hardest part to deal with around all of that is the humans, frankly, change management and making sure people are doing what they should be doing. It's tough, but that's what leadership is.
With the buy and build, I think it's a very hot topic right now. I think a lot of financial institutions, customers of yours even, I imagine, are thinking of what to build internally around agentic AI versus what should they purchase, right? From S&P Global or from the hyperscalers or incumbent vendors for natively agentic startups. And I think it's a very confusing landscape. And I think that most financial institutions try to experiment internally so they understand the technology better. And frankly, this is one of the hottest times for engineers to get their hands on new technology. They want to be doing this, right? Whether they should be doing all of it on their own from scratch, that's kind of an open question that many of these organizations are working through. But I'm curious from your vantage point, and how would you think about informing this type of decision for your customers? Because S&P Global, has such a unique position among the entire financial ecosystem. You have a long history of selling data and insights, and now agentic tools as well. And so you're going and having to inform what should they purchase from you versus trying to develop natively on their own. So I'm curious, like sort of how you approach that topic with your base.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The build versus buy thing is not new. It's just a different version of it now, given AI. And I think for us, the way I look at this is like we have a rich history. S&P Global is over 160, years old. And if you think about the trust and the brand that we have, our customers value that. Like that's why they buy our data, our insights, and our, domain knowledge that we've built up over those, 100 plus years. And I think that, when I think about the AI that we build on top of our data, that's the differentiation. So if you think about how people are actually using our platforms and product offerings to accelerate their workflows and make decisions with convictions, I'm all about making sure that our customers know that they can rely on us meeting them where they are in their journey of, their Gen AI roadmaps or their businesses. And so if you think about our financial data, our commodities data, our index, our benchmarks, and so on, like where we're going to get huge traction is adding AI value on top of that data. So think about things like, report generation, where, we know that our customers are leveraging our data to generate reports for their organizations and potentially for their customers. I can imagine a world in which we're now saying, we've got our data, which I know you need. And then we're also helping you generate that report with these AI agents. And so now you can trust that you have the most relevant data. You can now see the AI create a big part of the report that's important to you. And that's not core to your business. Like, if you look at any organization and you look at the mix of people and where resource is spent, sometimes it's surprising where resource is spent on something that is being spent somewhere else at another 100 other companies. And so that's where the opportunities lie, I think, for us. And I want to make sure we protect our brand first and foremost. Like, the reason that we are different to any other startup that may consider doing something else is just the trust that we have with our customers. And that's really important in this time.
Yeah, I think that's a huge factor, right? That's probably the number one factor for getting adoption in enterprise is that can you trust this organization to serve the mission critical workflows that you have, the work that's being done. And if you don't have that, then it doesn't matter like how great the product is or the technology is, right? None of that truly matters. I think S&P definitely has a massive advantage there. When you think about startups sort of being built in this space, or even incumbents building in this space that it may work off of S&P data, maybe they're buyers of S&P or want to partner with S&P. How do you think of that approach? So having S&P be more of a marketplace or a partner to other startups, they may want to leverage certain data assets that S&P has to deliver the end number of end user or product experiences that they envision for their, like, let's say, fintech play that they have. I'm curious what that ecosystem or marketplace model looks like for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And I won't speak on behalf of all the people that own specific businesses at S&P Global. But what I would say is that if you think about our focus on customers and meeting them where they are, it's a big part about why we believe like things like AI ready data, our LLM ready API, examples like our commodity insights data showing up in, the Microsoft Copilot tool is a great point around like we imagine our data and insights, showing up where you are. And I think that that's going to be an important part of how we think about this. It's not going to be one monolithic marketplace or one specific delivery channel. There's going to be multiple delivery channels. And for us, our job is to make sure like our customers are seeing our data, our insights showing up to the ecosystems that they are part of, that they are building, and ensuring that they can see that our data is the trusted source.
Let's talk about the Microsoft Copilot partnership, because I think obviously that's Azure and Microsoft are very trusted brands among the same base of customers that you cater to. For a lot of companies, their first exposure to agentic AI or LLMs happens to be Azure or Azure OpenAI. And so this is a great outlet to go and reach the end user. How was the partnership struck? Like, where does it provide you value and Microsoft value in serving the end customer better?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would first say that like we're talking to, all of the kind of trusted hyperscalers and you can see our data show up in pretty much all of those ecosystems. And I think the important thing is like focusing on not one spot. And so what we realized is just the adoption of tools like Microsoft's Copilot, or pick your other hyperscalers version of the similar things. One of the things that they were struggling with was hallucinations and can they trust the data? So, going back to that point about the data and trust, now you can see, our kind of commodities insights data show up for specific customers in the energy space. And that's meaningful to them. Like, so now that they can trust that data and they're already using it through other means and other channels, but now that they're experimenting with, AI tools and deep research, and they can trust that they've got access to our data, that just creates another delivery channel for us. Mm-hmm. And I think that the part that we are still thinking through, and frankly, we don't have all the answers on, is just like, what will our customers end up doing next? And so that's why it's really important to have this iterative approach where you're constantly talking to the customers. You're hopefully finding opportunities to do co-development with them so you can see about how this is going to change the workflows of the customers. Because it's not done yet. And again, I keep going back to this point, but I think it's super important, is that it's early days. Like 6 months ago, think about how much we were talking about agents and agentic architecture. And so 6 months from now, it could be something else, right? Like, so we've just got to be able to pivot and move quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think the first way that people experience some of the latest capabilities are through the consumer experience. So they use like a deep research model or reasoning model, right, to go and get really great, rich information that is very nuanced, very detailed with citations, but for consumer settings, right? So using Perplexity or OpenAI's deep research or using DeepSeek, whatever it might be. And then it really lights up kind of light bulbs in their head around what potentially could be done in enterprise. And then there's a order of magnitude more complexity, particularly regulated spaces like this, where trust becomes a huge factor, access to data becomes a huge factor. But those enterprise experiences are being designed right now, maybe leveraging some of the learnings from consumer, but this is a rapidly moving space. So 12 months ago, 6 months ago, very, very different conversations were being had. You're absolutely right. Like if you look 6 months, 12 months out, it's hard to really know exactly all the ways all this will play out. But it almost feels like you have to be in the thick of it right now to keep up with the advances so you make the right decisions around what to build, how to experience this, how to incorporate this as part of your work, right? All of these things are going to be pretty critical.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's actually through, the early days, even before ChatGPT hit the stage on, I think it was late 2022, we were already working with language models. And one of the things that we had understood is just the importance of training data, the importance of, accurate data. And so that was really our focus. And it's going to become even more important, right? Like if you think about, responsible use of AI and ethical use of AI, just this idea that like we need to ensure that we're creating that accurate, trusted data. And we want to make sure that their biases of it is kind of understood. And I think that that's going to be the job of regulators, it's going to be the job of individual organizations, it's going to be the jobs of the people developing the AIs. And so I just think that I keep coming back to this point of like, the AI systems are just exactly that, these systems. And so what they're going to need is a way to interact with meaningful data insights. And you want to, as an individual, see that kind of traceability, of where it's coming to, the conclusions it's coming to, so you can make the decision that you feel is right for an organization. And then when you think about agents, now you need to understand, like, okay, what are the guardrails that we want to put in place of these things? How do we make sure like it can only take certain types of decisions? And if there is an edge case of sorts, it gets flagged for reviews. And so those things are being figured out, right? The other thing that is not figured out is liability, right? Like, what are the liability protections that an organization has of these agents, IP protection? So, I hear lots of people say, oh, these are all the reasons that, agents and agentic architectures aren't going to be important and aren't going to like do the work of organizations. But, go back to kind of, the dot-com era. And yes, there was that trough of disillusionment, but, turns out, the timing was wrong, but they were right. And I think that we'll figure out a lot of these things as we go along.
So maybe the last few questions here as we think about what's in the future, right? So obviously agentic AI agents, big topic. What is your stance on multi-agent systems where the agents aren't just from a single company? So you can think of this as like S&P's AI agents working with AI agents that might be on your customer side, or third-party AI agents that the customer has bought from another vendor. There's this whole premise of like agent to agent or A to A. What is your stance on that today?
I think it's extremely important. And I think one of the initiatives that we've kicked off at S&P Global is starting to kind of develop and socialize a enterprise agentic framework that we want our whole organization to get behind. The reason that's going to be important is, like, we are as an industry, I think, getting to the point where we've got, okay, we're going to have these agents interact with other agents, external and internal. So we need a kind of framework and an architecture to determine, like, what are the kind of rules of the road and what are the guardrails. And if you think about the success of MCP, which, thankfully Anthropic kind of open sourced and brought out to the world, and how wildly it's being adopted. I mean, even I am like super surprised at like how quickly people have kind of got onto that as the kind of standard. That's great. That means that, like, people are trying to understand how can they interact with agents both internally and externally. And I think that that's where the magic of like actions is going to happen that I talked about earlier, where now you've kind of decomposed the workflow as a series of these agents. And, we may create a number of those agents internally, but there could increasingly be agents externally that we buy. How we buy them, it will be interesting, right? Like, is it by the task? Is it by the hour? But, it's very clear the moment we have this kind of framework in which we can operate, it starts to become so easy in which you can start to do end-to-end workflows.
And I think that's a great way to cap off this episode, because I think the future isn't just agent to human, it's also agents to agents, both internal and external, and how they interplay with humans. And then, of course, all the myriad of workbenches that are going to be ever present within the ecosystem. So I think managing that complexity is the big challenge, and it feels like we're in the early days. And for a very large organization, S&P Global is definitely at the vanguard of making that happen. So it's been incredible to hear that story from you, Bhavesh, directly. And I'm pretty excited for where things go. I'd love to go and revisit this conversation a year or two from now and see where things stand then.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like we'll talk about lots of products and technology that we've released, but then we'll be talking about phrases and things that we never would have imagined. And congratulations, Ankur, to yourself and the success of everything that you're doing. I get so inspired hearing about people talking about AI and how they want to leverage AI. And so, this is still the beginning. So thanks again for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Bhavesh. Really appreciate the episode and your time as well.